Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I am the director of the Ashland Public Library. And apologies to you, I was running late today, and we are starting a couple minutes late, but we're here now, which is awesome. And we are here to talk about Fantasy Romance February, FaRoFeb. And here comes Vela.
Can you hear me?
There we
Am I
go.
here? Oh, good. All right.
Great. So I was just introducing everybody. So I wanted to say that Fantasy Romance February, it's been going on for, what, 4 years now, Harriet?
Yeah, I think this is the 4th year. Yep.
And I was in on it from the ground floor doing panels from the first year. So I'm very excited to be here to have the conversation, another conversation about all kinds of interesting things. But first I want to say thank you to the Friends of the Ashland Public Library for supporting all of our programs. And I'd like to thank all of our authors who agreed to let us share this program with other libraries, because, you know, when libraries work together, we make magic. So that's where we get into the fantasy part of this, right? And yes, we're very excited to have a conversation about romantasy. Fantasy romance, romantasy, what the heck is it all? Does it need a name? So I'd like to welcome our authors, Nisha Tuli, Harriet Moore, and Vela Roth, to our virtual stage. And I'm just going to go around really quick and ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your most recent book. So I'm going to start with you, Nisha.
Hi, I'm Nisha. I'm a fantasy romance romantasy author. I write my most well-known book is Trial of the Sun Queen, and my most recent book is Heart of Night and Fire, which is a South Asian-based fantasy romance. And my next book comes out next Friday, which is the second book in that series.
Okay, very nice. So do you have any particular bent to your fantasy romantasy?
I write pretty high heat. I wrote enemies to lovers, slow burn, fated something, not necessarily mates, but fated something. And, those tend to be my bread and butter. And my Trial of the Sun Queen series is like fae romance, more like ACOTAR type stuff. And yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Harriet.
Yeah, so I'm Harriet, or I write under the pen name H.R. Moore, and I write fantasy romance / romantasy. And I have a series set in our world, an epic fantasy romance series that feels quite contemporary, one that feels like it's this more sword and sorcery, Game of Thronesy type world. And then my latest release, which I'm really excited about, is coming out on the 8th of March. So that will be book 1 in a brand new epic fantasy romance series. And all of my books there's always magic, strong women, steam, and plot twists. I do love a good plot twist.
We love a good plot twist, especially in our fantasy. You can be anything, right? It's not grounded in reality. I would say. I don't know. Vela?
Yeah, hi. I just want to say, Mina, thank you so much for having us, because I've been watching your panels all our years of FaRoFeb. It's so nice to finally virtually meet you.
Thank you.
And I'm Vela Roth, and I write epic fantasy romance with vampires. So my book that is probably most well known as Blood Mercy. That's book 1 in my Blood Grace series. And book 8 is coming out in June. I just did the cover reveal for that yesterday. And that'll be Blood Feast. So it's a long saga following the same characters and a diverse cast of supporting characters through all of these quests and political intrigue as they try to create peace between humans and vampires.
Ooh.
So, and it is spicy, and people tend to call it a comfort read, but set in a little bit of a dark world. So
Sometimes you need a little bit of both, right?
yeah, I try to aim for that balance.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about fantasy romance, and what is it exactly that makes it a fantasy romance as versus now what's called romantasy? So, like, Harriet, I'm going to start with you. What do you think are the two different definitions? Oh, I go in a circle. You'll all be first at one point.
Oh, wow. This may be controversial, but I don't think there is much difference in the mind of a lot of readers between Nisha's I don't think there is a lot of difference in mind of a lot of readers about the difference between a romantic fantasy, a fantasy romance, or a romantasy. And certainly before I started writing in the genre, I didn't necessarily say this is a fantasy romance or this is a romantasy. For me, the important things are that they are books set in fantasy worlds. We can argue about whether they have to be low or high fantasy, whether they have to be in our world or another world, or does an altered version of our world count, but not, So I think for me, it all gets very complicated very quickly, but there are two things that have to exist. There have to be fantasy elements and there have to be lots of romantic elements. And I think that to me is what's a fantasy romance. And those are the books that I look for as a reader. I don't get caught up as a reader on there has to be a classic romance arc. Some people say a fantasy romance has to have that really classic romance arc. Other people say it doesn't. So I don't know if there's any clear definition, but for me, I think all of them really are, is there fantasy? Is there romance? If you check both of those boxes, then people will call them one of those three things.
Okay. Vela.
I agree. I think there's a lot of confusion in the minds of authors and readers about what all the words mean. I see people using them interchangeably. I see people using one to mean one thing and someone else using the same word to mean something else. And, I think, maybe we should just get rid of all the terms and just call them magical kissing books. If there's magic and kissing, then that's what it is, right? But I think if you're advertising something as a romance and it says this is a romance, you probably need to be mindful of the HEA expectation of romance readers, because that's a compact between the author and the reader. If it's labeled romance, you expect your happy ending. Mm-hmm. And I used to hear people saying, oh, well, if it's romantic fantasy, the HEA is not required. But lately, I feel like that expectation of an HEA has kind of actually bled over into books that are being labeled as romantasy. So if anything, the lines are just blurring even more. Mm-hmm. But I think at the end of the day, author opinions are not that important. I think what matters is communicating an accurate expectation to the reader of what they can find in your book, which is hard to do when readers don't know how they want to use the terms either. But I think as long as you're setting up the reader's expectations correctly about, is this got a happy ending? How much romance is in it? Then you've done your job, because you want the reader to pick it up and know what they're getting and be able to choose books that will be satisfying. So
mm-hmm. I think Nisha's going to disagree that the author opinion doesn't make a difference.
No, I'm not going to disagree with that.
Oh, okay, all right, because I know you have opinions.
You said you had strong opinions.
I do, though, because I think that I think a lot of readers don't know and don't care, and that's totally I think this is more important to us than it is to them. But I think romantasy and fantasy romance are the same thing. Romantasy is just a cute little marketing name. They're exactly the same thing. There is no difference. I did see someone say that romantasy was the thing that didn't require the HEA, and I just about lost my mind. I'm like, no, that is not. Anyways, the romantic fantasy is where I kind of get stuck. To me, a fantasy book with just a relationship is literally just a fantasy book, and that the romantic fantasy label got slapped onto books written by women specifically because they can't just be fantasy authors. Like Game of Thrones has tons of relationships. Do we ever call it romantic fantasy? No, it's because a man wrote it, right? So I think that people were trying to capitalize on the popularity of fantasy romance by throwing that on there and be like, oh, I have some romance too. But then also sort of differentiating between women writers or female presenting authors versus the men who write real fantasy. you know, and if women write kissing, then it's not important anymore, right? Then it's just fluffy and stupid and irrelevant, right? So like, which we all know as romance authors, how often we get treated that way, right? So I think that's more the important distinction rather than worrying so much about what each one is. It's sort of like, why did we come up with that distinction when it was never like a fantasy book with some relationships in it is just a fantasy book. Every genre of book has relationships in it, and we don't just slap the word romantic into it, right? Like it's so odd to me, but
yeah, I mean, I always have the example of Wilbur Smith, who lots of people haven't read now. He's kind of old school, but he writes like adventure stories. He's a male writer, and writes adventure stories, and has had huge popularity a couple of decades ago. And every single story has a really strong romantic subplot. I mean, and you could argue, really, is it even a subplot? You know, he has one series, like an Egyptian series, which has magic set in ancient Egypt and a really central romance. I'm like, that's fantasy romance. But because it's written by a man,
it just gets to be fantasy. It's just
story.
like the literary versus women's fiction argument, right? If like men write about relationships, it's literature. But if women do it, now it's women's fiction. Like it can't just be literature, right? So I think it sort of falls under the same umbrella, but that is my strong opinion about it. And to me, and romantasy,
less controversial.
I didn't think anyone here would disagree with me, but other people might. But yeah, I think romantasy is just a fun little marketing name that combines the two, and is easier to say than fantasy romance. Like it's just, yeah. And I know, like in Europe, they've been using romantasy much longer than we have. So like in Germany, I think Germany, yeah, it came from Germany. They were the first ones to use it, and it's sort of trickled over here now. And like the Germans are on the cutting edge.
Apparently so.
Well, that's not something you hear every day. For people listening in, if you have a question, just put it in the Q&A and I will moderate it to our panel. It's a little bit harder for me to manage or keep track of the chat.
Well, I see someone posted in the chat about Claire's. I haven't read that series, so I can't speak to it specifically. Separate romantic arcs with different men at different points in her life.
Which series?
Claire Sager's Beth Beneath Black Sails. Have you read that? I haven't read that one.
I haven't read Claire's books, but I do believe she considers herself a fantasy romance author. So I could be wrong,
think
but
you were right, Vela, too. Like the event, like I think fantasy romance is different than regular romance in that you don't need an HEA at the end of the first book, but you do need one somewhere at the end, right?
Yes,
like eventually you have to get there. Versus in this genre, people are more accepting that in between the books you might not be getting it yet.
Yeah.
And it's funny to me when readers ask me, and they're like, well, is it going to be a happy ending? I'm like, it's a romance. I'm like, I'm going to make them suffer before they get there, but there will be a happy ending.
Yeah, this is me. My first book has a cliffhanger where the two main characters are separated, but there's a
which
guaranteed,
is totally normal. Yeah,
a guaranteed HEA at the end of the series.
Yeah. And you kind of have to, because you can't like make them happy for 4, 5, 8 books, because that's gonna get kind of boring if they're too happy the whole time, right? So
yes.
And I can't see the question, but you know, I think I quite enjoy it when I read fantasy romance books that've got multiple relationships in them, and you know, different. Yeah. So you know, some fantasy romances will literally follow one couple and it'll be very close to that couple, and it will, you know, be very much their story. And then others will be much bigger in terms of, you know, they're part of a much bigger world, and there are many more characters, and there's something else that's going on that's driving the story forward, as well as their, you know, what's happening to them.
And that's where you get all the spin-offs from.
Exactly. Yes, people ask me, why are you writing 8 books about the same couple? I'm like, well, it's not just about them.
Yeah, right.
It's about this whole world, and there's a cast of like 2,500 side characters with complicated fantasy names, you know.
Yeah. If you guys open the chat, if you guys click on the chat button at the bottom, you can see the question. Someone's asked about how you don't always end up with the first love interest, which is a hallmark of my books too. I do the bait and switch all the time, which makes it really hard to market. I gotta say, I gotta stop doing this to myself, but like it's
you and me both, honestly.
Oh my God, it's so, and then you're just like, whatever, I'm just gonna lean into the end game love interest, and you're all gonna know.
Yeah, my end game love interest is very clear from the start, but I I do love it when the heroines get to be as romantically adventurous as the men,
Totally.
down with
Yeah.
double standards.
Absolutely.
That's really curious
they
because,
definitely-
we do a lot of these talks for me, like having that happy ending at the very end of a book is like the trick for me. But you're saying that if you have an arc of books or a series going on where, at some point, some characters are going to get together, and that has worked well. Do you tell people that, do they know to expect that?
I think it's the standard in fantasy. I mean, if you'd use Sarah J. Maas as like the, that's how all of her books go. Like that's, I think that's become the norm. Like if you're reading fantasy romance, that's what you expect. You're not going to get you might get it, and it might just be temporary at the end of like,
I don't think I read widely enough then, because almost, at least from, well, okay, let me go back a little.
Well, yeah, like her most famous series, at the end of the first book, she's with a different guy than right? Like that's, I think.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. I don't know how, it's always amazing to me people don't know, right? Like,
I hope everybody in this panel is past spoilers for SJM.
Yeah, sorry, too bad. Books have been out for years.
We hope, I think we all understand that Reese is endgame. So
yeah.
Sorry if you didn't know that.
It's always funny when you see somebody pick up the series and they don't know, and you're just like, I love Tamlin. I'm like, whoa, you are in for a
But it's hilarious how everybody just goes silent on social media. Everyone's like,
yeah, it's like,
anything.
Or they just start like putting like laughing emojis or whatever. Yeah, just sorry about that. Yeah.
Well, that's a change or a difference from like what we're used to, but it sounds like it really works, and people ultimately like it because you've expanded what love can look like for somebody. Maybe.
Yeah, I think there is that point around that kind of double standard for women that we see a lot, and I've had it in my book. So one of the Kingdoms of Shadow and Ash, which is my latest complete series, the Fire is a queen. She has conquered 5 kingdoms, and we kind of start at her having conquered the 5 kingdoms, and then she has a relationship with someone who's not the person who she ends up with. And some readers like that because they see her being kind of like being a real person. Many people have relationships with other people before they end up with the person that they end up with. And because of where she is in her, there's an emotional reason why she does it. She's kind of removed from everyone, so it's very difficult for her to have relationships with people. And so when an opportunity presents itself, she's like, well, why wouldn't I do this? Because that's what I want right now. Whereas, that's not where she ends up. And so some people are really happy with that and are like, brilliant, great to see, and like there's a reason why this happened. And other people are like, it's not the person that she ends up with. How dare you do this? And I mean, I think it just is personal preference and what we like to read.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are fantasy romance readers, especially those who are coming from more of a romance background, that they do have the expectation that, the end game love interest will be apparent from the start. But I think I do agree that SJM has kind of normalized doing it differently to some extent. So like you said, Harriet, it's about, I guess, the individual reader's preferences.
And I think it does depend where you come from as well. Like if you are a staunch romance reader and you expect book to follow a certain format, then maybe it's more jarring when you read something that's different to that. I don't know.
But I think this is why fantasy romance is so unique within the romance genre. Like I think it does almost everything differently than other romance genre books do, right? Like with the not needing an HEA right at the end of the first book. Like the fantasy plot and the romance plot are equally, both of those are important to the story versus like genre romance, like this relationship is the most central thing, versus in fantasy romance you've got the relationship and the fantasy plot and they both exist together and one can't exist without the other. I think that's what makes it totally unique compared to basically every other subgenre of romance.
And what is the difference between fantasy romance and a paranormal romance? Or is there? Is it just another nomenclature thing?
I think that's like paranormal tends to be more like our world. someone correct me if I'm wrong, versus I don't know, like that.
Yeah,
I was
the lines blur again.
yeah,
but
it's
yeah,
very blurred.
I think the main reader expectation is when you pick up PNR, you are expecting like our world, contemporary setting with vampires, werewolves,
Werewolves, those
shifters.
kinds
Yeah.
of things. Yeah.
Whereas with fantasy romance, you tend to expect either, you know, a secondary world or a very, very magical version of our world.
Yeah.
But I mean, the lines blur.
I think that's
And
kind
then
of
I
true,
think
but yeah, I'm sure there's lots that.
I've definitely seen people talk about paranormal in the epic sense, because there might be like werewolves and shifters and vampires in an epic fantasy setting, which is, I think the lines
Right.
have sort of blurred. But then also we're seeing the emergence of like urban fantasy romance as a separate thing to paranormal romance, which is definitely what I called my last series, that was set in our world, but it was like it has other kind of magical beings and magic that's not vampires, shifters, and werewolves. So I'm like, okay, well, you're not. It's really difficult to like, should I call it paranormal romance? But then if I do that, then everyone's going to think it's got those elements, and it doesn't. So then
Right.
this whole, more, you know, exploring different elements of magic, I suppose, within our world, but not necessarily an altered version of our, like, not totally altered version of our world, where you'd be like, oh, well, that's like epic fantasy, but in our world, if you see what I mean.
So I was always told
No.
that
I mean, it's like, no.
these like sort of like names come from more publishers that want to put books in a certain area of a bookstore, let's say, or a library, or maybe. Although we just go by last names, so it doesn't really matter. But is that something that affects you in terms of sales or publishing, or people telling you what to write or how to write it? Nisha, go ahead.
I don't think bookstores break it down that much though. Like they're not breaking things up into PNR and fantasy romance, and like my books end up in either the romance or the fantasy section depending on what that bookstore wants to do. Like there's no, although probably some of them are starting to have specific more fantasy romance sections, but I know I've looked at bookstores and seen that they often end up in either or category. I think though, because like when you're an indie author too, though, it's all online, and Amazon has 8 million categories, right? So that's where it gets broken down a bit more, and maybe why we're having these conversations, because like there are all these different categories that they have there, and when you're putting your book, you have to think about what category you're putting it into, and you want to make sure you're in a category with other books like yours because you want to meet those reader expectations. So I think that's where more might be a bit of where like all of this is coming from.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's more of a concern with when we're online trying to communicate to readers what the book is, like in the book description, in the Amazon categories, social media posts, marketing, you know,
Right.
all of that is where the terminology gets more, I guess, relevant.
And because it is so important to find your right readers, because that is the surest way to like turn someone off, is if they expect something and they get something totally different than what you're giving them, which is one of the big challenges of conveying, you know, it's 400 or 500 page books into like a single social media post, and trying to convey what they're going to get.
But does that label like ever feel stifling to authors in terms of like, oh, you're a fantasy romance writer, so that's all you're ever going to write?
Not for me. I love fantasy romance. I can't imagine writing anything else.
I don't think it does, but I think you have to be slightly careful, and I've definitely suffered from this, about writing different types of fantasy romance.
Yeah.
And your readers, you know, some readers aren't as happy to read across subgenres as others. So I think you sort of have to, if you build up a readership in one area, you do sort of run the risk of not all of those readers will come with you if you then write an epic fantasy romance. She
That's
says
a good
from
point.
experience.
Because the minute I see urban, I'm like, I'm not interested. Like,
yeah,
you know,
exactly. Whereas I really like it.
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah. I hope so.
Shockingly.
Go ahead,
I'm
Bella.
ecumenical. I love all fantasy romance of every flavor. So.
Oh, look at that. There you go.
But yeah, I mean, I think the labels I don't think they're stifling, because they're tools for communicating with our readers.
Yeah.
You know, and so they're powerful. And you know, like you said, Harriet, it's the labels are important because, you know, if you have readers who don't want to cross over, you want to be clear with them. Okay, this is not that.
Yeah.
So, you know, don't come if it's not your thing, you know. And like you were saying, Nisha, I think we've all been waiting for this moment when fantasy romance or romantasy will have its moment. And so, I mean, I love the label because, oh, my favorite thing that I've been writing all these years finally is a thing. Like
we were
have a
all
word
here
for it.
waiting
Hooray!
for it to become, and now it's having its
mean,
moment, and some people are not happy about that, but we don't care about those people.
Because I know we've all been writing it since before it was even recognized as a genre, and we're thrilled that it has a name now. So
and I mean, that's part of writing to market, is writing within those. That's just one of the things, you know, we are authors and artists, but we are also running businesses and want to sell books. So we have to be writing the things that people are looking for. I mean, I think that's super important. And
I mean, there's nothing wrong with giving readers what they want.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, but I think that can feel stifling. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I find that more stifling than the labels of, you know, the bigger genre labels. You know, so it's sort of, and authors definitely have to make decisions pragmatically around, do I write a fae book for which I know there is a massive market, or, you know, do I write a fantasy romance book that's a little bit more experimental, or you know, doesn't have the same concepts that readers know about? And ultimately, you know, it comes down to marketing, and it comes down to, as Nisha said, our ability to distill a 400 or 500 page book into, you know, a 10-second TikTok video. And if readers already know fae, then that's half the work is kind of done for you. So I think that I find that more stifling, because my impulse generally is not to write fae, which I love reading, but it's just not what I want to write. So I think, you know, there are definitely, I think authors have to face those commercial decisions around, do you write something that you know there's a market for, or do you take a bit more of a risk on something for which there is not currently a market that's quite as obvious?
And I think it's partly like marrying the two sometimes. Like, I have one series that is fae and is obviously very to market, but my other one, my South Asian series, is all completely different creatures. There's no vampires, there's no right? Like, there's a version of vampires that I've created, but I'm not calling them that. So like, it's way harder to market that series because it doesn't have any of those very specific creatures or things that are, but I wanted to write it, right? So that's right. Like I wanted to write it, and yes, it's harder to market and it's not as popular, and I know why, but good point. I mean, sometimes I think you just have to find the balance and like what speaks to you, and ultimately decide what feels right to you.
And what your goals are, and what you're trying to achieve.
Goals are,
and you know, I totally have the same thing. So I have my series is set in our world, and people reincarnate, and I call them demons, but no one knows what they are. Whereas if you say, you know, so it's much harder to convey reincarnating groups of reincarnating people. They're called demons,
but not like that. And then there's this, and then
I relate to this so much because I could have saved myself so much work by just calling my book Vampire Fated Mates, but I gave them this fantasy name, Hesperines, and their fated mate is called a Grace, and so like I gave up all this keyword traction. But you know, at the same time,
but you sometimes learn that, you know.
But you're treating the reader like an intelligent person that can figure it out. You know, like you're not just spoon feeding us the things that we're used to. You're giving us something new and exciting and interesting, which I think is powerful for us readers. Why do you think fantasy romance is having a moment? Do you think it has to do with COVID?
No.
No.
Okay, I actually do think it. I think the reason it's so appealing right now is because it gives two things. It gives the guaranteed happy ending, and it gives the escape of a fantasy world, and that is a really compelling combination because, you know, we can get our wonderful HEAs from romance novels, and we can get escape from fantasy, but both of those in one book, wow, that's the perfect coping mechanism for our world right now. So
Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, it's just escape. It's just like they're just the kind of books I like to read. I always want romance. I always want fantasy. I read YA books growing up that had those things, and there was not the adult equivalent when I became an adult, and that's what I wanted. And
exactly.
I think a lot of women want that, and I think there just hasn't been a focus on the needs of women readers, and women are the most prolific readers, which makes absolutely no commercial sense. But now, we've got a route to market from self-published authors direct to readers. Yeah, and that's just changed things. And so I think we've now got this kind of direct distribution channel. TikTok has really kicked things up a notch. But I think it's just women readers, women authors who are writing the things that women readers want to read.
Yes, I think that's a really important point about this generation of women readers and writers. We grew up on certain books that gave us a taste for fantasy romance, and then we started creating the books that we wanted to read. And I think that's another reason that it's such a popular thing right now, because all the women who grew up on those same YA books as we did are now writing, and we
all read Twilight, and now we're all
or Tamara Pierce or Crown Jewel or so I think it's a phenomenon that we've created, like women creating the books they want to read. It's really exciting.
And maybe women not being afraid to say, I read this, like when I was, younger, everything had to have like a cover on it, like a paper cover on it. 'Cause like the, bodice stripper covers it, the subway didn't go over that well. And now
well,
I'm
sure ebooks helped that too, because you can't see the cover. There's no cover to see.
Just be discreet with our spice on the subway.
I always think fantasy romance is so popular because you can have these, like, the relationship has world-ending stakes often that you just don't get in other forms, right? Like, I write office romance too. I love a good office rom-com, but the vibe, like, you can't have these like world-ending stakes to their relationship because they're fighting over like the promotion, right? It's just not the same, right? So I think that's where like there's the fantasy of that, like, he would burn the world down for you in a way, that we just don't get in our real lives ever. And it's just part of the fantasy also, in terms of, beyond just the fantasy aspect of it, right? Like,
yeah. And I think one of my favorite I've read a lot of historical romance, a lot of romantic suspense, because those sometimes, I think, like you were saying, Nisha, earlier about fantasy romance being so plot heavy, I think you can often get some of that in romantic suspense, for example. So even before fantasy romance, I was gravitating toward all of the romances that take us out of our real lives to, a high stakes situation or a historical time that's not now, because there's just so much more drama, and there's so much more, things to care about, more than just, like you said, promotions at work. I don't get excited.
And we're just louder, damn it. We're just louder. We're not going to accept anymore that just because it's women love it, it's less than, right? Like, I'm sick and tired of that narrative, and like, I just, drives me nuts.
Harriet?
But I think you can also make reasons more compelling. So, there are only so many reasons in the real world why anyone will do anything.
Right.
And plausibly. So, but you like put an epic fantasy setting in there, and you're like, well, I can make up any number of reasons.
Right. There's only so many ways you can fall in love with your coworker. Yes.
And like in contemporary romance, if he goes and kills a bunch of people for you, it's going to be a problem.
Yeah, like that's
a fantasy world.
He can like
literally burn the world and not get arrested. So
yeah, like that's a little different. Morally gray doesn't work as well in a contemporary setting, unless you're maybe writing like mafia stuff, I guess. But
dark romance, and that's another reason dark romance is getting so popular, I think, is the high stakes.
Dark romance is fantasy. I don't know, like that is fantasy too, like in a different sort of way. Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say that the two other genres that I keep hearing are really having a moment right now are horror and sci-fi, which both have that sort of like cathartic world building type of thing too, although they don't always have romance. So it's nice to see some of these things that I grew up with and really enjoyed are now like Yeah, they're finally like appreciated. So I'm going to get to some of the audience questions because, you know, I could just go on all night. Judy
You could
asked,
too.
what are your favorite tropes to read and favorite tropes to write about? And I'm going to start with Nisha on this one.
I'm a slut for enemies to lovers always. I also love fated mates, one bed, although one horse I argue is superior to one bed.
One horse.
I love a slow burn, and I like to read and write those. Yeah.
Okay, Vela.
I'm also team slow burn, very, very slow burn. But I want my high spice after the burn explodes. I love found family. And I always keep coming back to fated mates and forbidden love, that combo of, you know, we're destined to be together, but it's forbidden. So much tension. And I do love to read and write enemies to lovers sometimes, but I'm kind of the odd one out here. I actually prefer the friends to lovers vibe, which is really, it's a little more unusual in fantasy romance, but you know, I just love the trust and the comfort that comes from the friends to lovers arc. So
Oh, that's really nice. Harriet?
I mean, I love them all really. I think I've read so many enemies to lovers. I love enemies to lovers, but I feel like I need to read something else now. And so my latest book, and I've read quite a few sort of pseudo friends to lovers, where there just isn't, there's like a reason that they can't be together, even though they really would like to be together, they sort of can't tell each other off for whatever reason. So they're not like enemies, but it's not sort of a simple route to their relationship. So it's sort of friends to lovers, but maybe they weren't friends, but it's just not enemies to lovers. It's like something else to lovers. So for example, you know, arranged marriage tropes. So like Radiance by Grace Drove is a great example of, you know, there's an arranged marriage, and they don't hate each other. They're just kind of like pragmatic around, well, this is something that we just have to get on with. And that definitely inspired my new book. So, you know, I quite enjoyed playing with that a bit. I mean, I love found family. Again, slow burn is what I usually do, although there are a couple that don't have quite so slow a burn. Forced proximity, can't beat a bit of forced proximity, whether that's, you know, they have to go somewhere together, or there's only one bed, or there's only one horse, or there's only one chair. I always love an only one chair moment too.
The unsung hero, the only one chair. Love it.
Yeah. I did only one cloak in one of my other books.
Oh, I did one tent. I did one tent.
Only one cave.
Yeah.
Only one cave.
Oh, yes.
I mean, there's usually only one cave.
Yeah. How big is the cave?
Yeah, like big cave. Only one small cave.
One bedroll, one car, whatever. Okay, so I didn't hear anybody
forcing them together, forcing them.
Yeah, I didn't hear anybody say there's nothing a trope you wouldn't read or write. I'm not a writer, but like I hate secret baby.
I hate pregnancy anything, and I say this as a mom of two. I hate pregnancy anything. I do not want to read it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I think that one is just really in the doghouse right now. Nobody is into pregnancy stories right now.
No, I know. I don't know. And
I'm not against them when. Oh, go ahead, Harriet.
No, you go. You go.
I'm not against it. I just think I think it depends on the characters. It should fit the characters, and I think we need a balance where we see more HEAs without kids. You know, for the childless among us. I mean, I think it's good to have both, but
I mean, like equally, I have two kids, and I think it for me, I don't like it because it sort of gets rid of the escapism.
I know. I'm not fantasizing about that. Yeah. Like, God. Is the LI now going to leave his underwear lying in the bedroom?
Maybe.
My husband doesn't actually do that, but
as a little TMI, Nisha, thanks so much. Well, I mean, I think that for me, like, I just the secrecy of it, or like that is such a big secret. How can, as an author, and if an author can pull it off, I'm like so impressed. Give a reason for somebody keeping a baby a secret, or that big of a secret. So that's my
Need a
thing.
good reason for that, yeah.
Yeah. Anne says, when you start a series, do you usually have an idea of how many books it will take to complete the series, or does it take a couple of books to know where this story will end? Or will it end? I've now been reading, series that just will never end. They're just going to go on until the author dies. So, or I die, whichever one happens first. So, Vela, what about you? What do you think about that?
I love this question because I am writing a very, very long series, and I promise it will end before any of us die.
You can't really know that though, can you?
Well, hopefully.
The chair can collapse.
Survive long enough for me to write a couple more books. But yeah, I mean, I don't plan to like write it for the next 20 years, I actually did plan out how many books it would be while I was writing book one. So by the time I finished book one, I was pretty clear on the series structure and what each book would focus on. So I know some people love long series, some people get intimidated by them. It's kind of one of those controversy points in fantasy romance, I think. But I always try to reassure people when I'm writing a long series, there's a plan. None of this is filler. I promise there's an end. So, yeah.
I don't like, there's certain series like Kresley Cole or, JD Robb that I just don't, they're just going to keep writing.
Christine
and I love
Fian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just never going to stop, and I don't want them to.
Yeah. And, I think when you have a different couple in every book, there's not necessarily a reason to wrap up the series unless it's just getting tired. But when you have the same couple through multiple books, you do kind of want to give the reader an end in sight. When are we getting that series HEA? So,
yeah. Harriet?
I think my first three series, I definitely knew what I was going to do in terms of length. I don't really like writing longer than 3 books just because
you're smart.
It doesn't.
You're very smart.
Well, I just lose, like, I just always have new ideas that I want to explore. So I'm like, I kind of need this to be contained. I love, I have a story that I want to tell, and I kind of need that to be done. Luckily, they've never been 8 books long or 10 books. Or how many going for Vela? It's like 1 million books long.
It was supposed to be 8, but Amazon made me split a couple of them because they were too long for the page count limit on indie paperbacks. So it is going to be 10 volume.
Yeah, I mean, that just scares me. And and so I just have things I want to move on to. And even now I'm about to launch the first book in a new trilogy. I've written most of the trilogy. This one, still book 3 may turn into 4. So that might turn into 2 books. So it's a chance, but it will probably stay as 3 books. But I'm already itching to get into a new world and to start, so I don't know if I put it in me to write a 10-book series. But never say never.
Never say never. My next series is oh no, go ahead.
I will never write a 10-book series. I'm going to say that never ever.
You never know.
I'm not a plotter, so I do tend to figure things out as I go. I thought Artifacts Veranos was going to be 3 books, but then I wrote the second one and I was like, there's no way I can fit the ending into 1 book. So I made it 4. I just finished the 4th book, the first draft today. And I cried my eyes out.
Yeah.
I made myself cry so many times because there's like all these like endings and goodbyes, but I'm also ready to be done. And I don't think I could go past. I'm in the middle of 2 4-book series. My other one's also 4. It was also supposed to be 3, but then my editor wanted me to split the first book into 2 books because he felt like it was too different. Like there was a natural point, which was the right call. It made them both better. But 4 is enough because I'm like you, Harriet. I'm ready for something new. I don't like reading long series. I don't ever do that. It's like sorry, Phil.
I know it's like 10. Totally a matter of taste. No.
Yeah.
And even like,
I read the Suki whatever stack out, like, and those kept going and going, and by like I don't know what point I was like, I'm done now. I'm not interested in this anymore, right? Because it's just, to me, I just want something new and I want to write something new. And I'm even debating like my artifacts around a series. I have an idea for a spin-off with one of the characters, and I'm like, do I like float this? Do I like go to my publisher and be like, I have an idea for a spin-off, or do I just be like, no, let's start something completely new? Right? I can't decide what I want to do.
Something new, something new.
Yeah. Because
I
I have a million ideas for new things, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I just get so attached to a world. I just don't want to say goodbye. And I mean, I have a lot of new ideas, but a lot of them connect with the same worlds and are like spin-offs. So
yeah, I don't know. I do tend to get bored of everything easily.
So Virginia asks,
sick of myself.
Yeah, go on. No, you go.
Oh, Virginia asks, do you feel like your covers make or break your books? Because we were talking earlier about how fantasy romance has the most
covers are
amazing covers.
super important. Covers are incredibly important.
Definitely.
Like, other than the story itself, it's the next most important thing.
Oh wow. That was
like
what was the actual question? What was the question, Nina?
Do you think that your book covers can make or break your book?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And we see that a lot with people saying that they recovered their book and suddenly things started taking off. I think a lot of people underestimate how important marketing is to books.
Pretty important. It's pretty important.
No, it's true.
But then you become, I think a lot of readers sort of think, potentially, a lot of casual readers just think, oh, well, the good stuff just rises to the top. And, if it's good, people will read it and it will sort of do well. And that's not really the reality of how things, like books are a product like anything else. And in the same way that you would never pick up a bar of soap that had certain branding that didn't appeal to you, and if they didn't market that brand of soap, you would never even see it. So you wouldn't know to buy it in the first place. It's the same with books, and if it doesn't look amazing and the blurb doesn't sound great, then no one's going to read it, so they're not going to know whether it's good or not.
That's the thing not to skip on, is getting a nice cover for sure.
I recovered mine and it was a very good decision.
I'm going to say that I think fantasy romance is the only genre of romance that I haven't seen change into that cartoony look, or flowery. Like the women's fiction definitely has turned completely all the flowers. I don't even know what the heck's going on in those books. But because you can't get a sense of what's happening if it's all flowery or if it's kind of cartoony, and that there's it's an urban fantasy or something. You're like, that can't possibly be right. So how have you held the line to continue to make these amazing covers for your books? Is it you? Is it your publisher? Is it your readers?
I don't think that those would suit the genre. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. It never even occurred to me that might happen.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like mainly we don't necessarily make the trends. We respond to them as they come along. And so
I think that's a misconception that a lot of new authors have, is that a cover is supposed to tell the plot of the story, or it's supposed to be some unique expression of their artistic vision. But a cover is meant to tell the person what genre that book is and what they can expect from inside it. And when you pick up a cartoon cover right now, that's sort of a contemporary romance. That's what that is telling people. And with fantasy romance, the symbol covers are sort of the standard. There's a few, I know, Vela, you sort of deviate a little bit with a bit of the character illustrations, but it's still got that same the colors and the fonts and all of that sort of is packaged together, and it just tells the audience this is the kind of book you're getting, right? And that's the key to a good cover. And as long as we're all doing that same thing, it'll take somebody to having an incredibly successful book with a very different cover for it to change. That's how it will change. But it would need to be like fourth wing big for that to happen.
But I think also, fantasy books, it's almost different to paranormal romance as well in that way. There's more of a collector's edition phenomenon that's going on, and people want pretty books to put on bookshelves and to look at and to
a
love.
lot of these books have so many different covers because of the special editions
and sizes. We don't like the different sizes.
but I feel like I don't see the collecting happening in quite the same way in contemporary romance or historical romance.
Yeah,
it
sure.
feels, so therefore covers have to be something
Special.
different
Yeah.
as well, you know, and they have to be beautiful and stand out. And we do have conversations, I think, around like the couple on the cover versus symbols on the cover. That seems to be what authors tend to say, which of these two things do I go for? And I think every time we've had that conversation, there's been no kind of evidence around
Either
one
one.
performs.
Yeah.
And
I think you
also,
can do either of those things, but those are the options.
It's more about like it's more about the aesthetic and like the overall aesthetic than
yeah,
necessarily.
and the couple cover, an illustrated couple cover is very different from a photo manipulation.
So different. Yeah, totally
couple
different.
cover. So that's another
yes.
big.
Yeah, but then Kimberly Lemming's cover is
hers are really different
like,
then all of a
love
sudden.
them.
Yeah.
but they are illustrated.
But hers,
And-
I mean,
But they
but
completely
hers is
convey.
But hers is more of like a cozy rom-com style versus like epic fantasy. So I think that's why
Well,
hers go with that cartoony look, right? Like it's
yeah, and in monster romance, illustrated covers are still dominant, whereas the symbol covers are more epic fantasy. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. Because I just remember I think it was on Twitter. There was an author who had a cover it was like a muscular male holding his arms like this, and he's totally tattooed. And the publisher recovered it with like a like a cartoony cover, and it was like,
oh, I saw that.
Did you? Yeah. What did you think?
No, the original cover was so much better because that cover basically like was the forerunner of the Manchester cover, and then they went and like they're basically that's where that started from, and then they changed it, which is just such a shame. I mean, we could talk forever about Puritanism and like and the sexlessness of like anyways.
And we will. Maybe I'll have you back again, Nisha and Vela and Harriet, and I will be on time. Anne has one more question. If you don't mind staying for another few minutes because I started late, is that okay? Okay. Anne says, do you think the titles are as important as the cover art? Do you have trouble coming up with your titles? Do you come up with them? And have you had problems changing the title? Have you had publishers change the titles you intended to give one of your books? Let's talk about titles for a few minutes. Bella?
Oh, I definitely think titles are just as important because that's an opportunity to, again, communicate genre. The words you choose for your titles are such an important signal of what the reader is going to find inside the book. So I didn't have too much trouble choosing the titles for my current series because it's has a high fantasy version of vampires. So I was going for language that would signal fantasy and vampires. And for our author friends writing fae books, putting court in the title is a very, very clear signal. Okay, we're channeling SJM, so yeah, definitely super important. And I think just like with covers, if you look at the trends and if you look at your comp authors, you can make some pretty informed decisions about your title.
Yeah. Harriet?
Yeah, I agree with Bella. I think they're really important. I do think we're sort of seeing a bit of saturation around certain types of title. So something of something and something. Or the court titles. I think there are a lot that have very similar covers as well as very similar titles. And I think we're kind of getting to the point where we're a bit saturated. So I think it will probably move on a little bit from that to people doing other things. And then we're seeing that with Raven Kennedy's books, so Gold being her latest one. C.N. Crawford has also done some things like Frost and Ambrosia, so I think the sort of single word titles seem to sort of be creeping in a bit. But I think again they sort of have to convey exactly all the things we've already said. It has to convey genre, it has to convey what it is, it has to fit with the book and what's inside. I do find it quite hard to come up with titles personally, because there's so much pressure. It's so important, and sometimes they're obvious and sometimes they're not, for me anyway.
Nisha?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, titles are important. I have not really had trouble coming up with them. They always seem to fit. I mean, like I called one book Trial of the Sun Queen. That's literally what it is. It's a trial for So like it was very literal in that sense. So that was, but and then sort of I think also spoke to the genre and kind of like had sort of a close association with it. I think my favorite title is Wicked as the Reaper. And it's not until you read the book why you get why that's a clever title, which I think some people were like, oh, I was reading it, now I got why you called it that. So like I think those are fun titles too, if you can sort of like make it feel like it's on brand with a little bit of difference, and especially if you can be like, oh, and I get why you picked this title. Is kind of fun.
Okay, so last question, and it goes back to the very beginning of our talk where, Nisha, I think you said that your current series has a South Indian bent. And so I'm really curious about all of your opinion about if this is a moment for romance, fantasy romance, is it also a moment for diverse stories within that, especially in indie publishing where there's more opportunity or feels like there's more opportunity to get your story out? Harriet, I know, you know, like your claim to fame
I
is
feel like we should start with Nisha.
As a BIPOC author who writes brown girls in all of my stories, that's one of the things that I do. Yes and no. I mean, yeah, no one can stop me when I'm indie publishing, but I don't know. We have a hell of a long way to go still. Like it's, you know, you look at Bookstagram, you look at Book Talk, it's white author after white author after white author. Like it's so hard to break in and get the same kind of recognition. Yeah, slowly maybe, but I don't know. Sometimes I almost wish like I should have just picked a white girl name and wrote white girl characters and not let anyone see my face, right? Like I get a bit emotional about this topic because it's hard, and you get these comments from people and you see the reviews sometimes and you're just like, anyways, yeah, it is, because you have the freedom to do what you want to, and no one can tell you otherwise to do it. But I mean, we have such a long way to go still.
Mm-hmm. And is that in the indie publishing world, or
both?
is that
all of it,
okay.
From readers to publishers, everything, everybody, everywhere. Yeah,
every level.
Yeah,
I find it really interesting. Like my second series, the main male character was black, and the female character is kind of Mediterranean, you know, Mediterranean looking, I would say. And I got some character art done, and I had readers come up to me and be like, "Oh, I never realized he was black." You know, and I think it's really interesting because people don't necessarily even read what's there. They sometimes read what they expect to be there. And, you know, I think so even when you do put diversity into these things, it's much bigger than that. I don't know, and I don't know what the answer is, but you know, and it's interesting because we do have many BIPOC authors who are part of the FaRoFeb community, which is brilliant, and we do, you know, we do try and showcase BIPOC authors whenever we can, but there are less authors, BIPOC authors, than there are white authors.
No, that's not true.
And I don't know.
That's not true.
Well, it's actually, but in our community, but I feel like, so I think, okay, I mean, I'm not, the stats I looked at, so I have looked into it, and the published, like the stats show that there are less, and I don't know why that is. So maybe that's just a case of that BIPOC authors aren't included in the stats. But we definitely, I don't know, but we do see less BIPOC authors just in our community. And again, maybe that's because we like, maybe it was started because it started by me and started by, you know, white authors, and that feels like a lesson. Like I don't know. And I don't know what the answer is. You know, I'd love to see more BIPOC authors coming into our space. We would help, you know, we would do what we could to promote those authors. But I think it's a much bigger conversation.
Well, it's the whole world.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I will say when I get messages from readers who are like other South Asian women who are just like, I can't believe I saw myself in your book, and like those are the best messages to get. So like, I've never read anything like this, and it's just like, yeah, those are the best ones to get. But.
Yeah. I know we just lost Vela for a second, but I did want to hear what she.
Sorry, I just had to turn a light on. The sun is going down here.
I did want to hear your thought on this, and then we can say our goodnights.
I wanted to add to what Harriet said. We've been in situations with FaRoFeb where we are actively looking for more BIPOC authors to include in something, and we don't have enough. So if anyone is listening to this, we really would love to even out those statistics in our community. You know, we'd love to see more BIPOC authors signing up for all of our events. We love that. And, you know, we are imperfect, but our approach to that is we feel like we have to build the representation into the community from the ground up. It has to be like across the board inclusion. And so we definitely are not saying that we're there yet, but we're definitely trying. You know, we would love more diverse authors on our volunteer team. So we're so glad, Nisha, that you're participating this year. It's so wonderful to have you on the panel. So, you know, that's something that we are very mindful of trying to work on. And we're always open to feedback, you know, about how we can do better. So, but yeah, it has to start in the author communities, and it also has to start in the books. So I think those two things go hand in hand. It's not enough to just write diverse books. You have to actually represent diverse authors. So yeah, I mean, I feel like because I am not a diverse author, you know, everything I say about this should be taken with a grain of salt. But I get frustrated as a white author who makes an effort to put diversity in my books. I get frustrated when I see other white authors celebrated for that when diverse authors aren't actually, you know, celebrated. Like, we need to give more attention to the authors who are writing from their own experience. Yeah. So as important as it is for all of us to put diversity in our books, you know, celebrating, oh yeah, look, this white person put all these diverse characters in their book. That's not something we deserve a cookie for. And it's you know, it kind of disguises the fact that a lot of BIPOC authors are not being given the attention that they should have. So.
Okay. Nisha, did you want to say one last thing about it?
Yeah. Did you have thoughts on this?
No, I think I've said what I would.
Well, as a librarian, I'm going to say that we are always looking for, you know, diversity on our shelves. So to reflect our communities. So the more authors of color or backgrounds or, you know, neurodiverse authors, whatever it is, that's what we're looking for to add to our, you know, our spaces. So, you
Well, I
know,
have 5 books out, so
we can, yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah. We actually ordered your books.
But I think
we ordered books from all of our authors whenever we have panels. So that helps us
Thank
get a
you.
sense of like what is out there and how we can support not our programming as well. The authors that offer to come in and do programming with us. So yeah, your books are on our shelves.
great.
Thank you.
So thank you again for doing this. I really appreciate it. I know we went out on kind of a heavy note, but an important one. And I would also like to apologize again for being late, but also say that this is one of my favorite things every year. Just the fact that Harriet, you've continued to do it all these years long, and that it's grown and grown and grown. And I've gotten to meet some of my very favorite authors. So it's really, oh yes, it's all about me. So
well, I mean, I would say thank you so much for hosting, because it's lovely to do this every year. And it's not just me. Luckily, there is a big team of volunteers who also run it, because it's too big for one person to run now. So, you know, Vela is crucial in terms of running, you know, all of our activities.
Thank you.
Lizette Marshall, I will give a shout out to as well.
Definitely.
As operator. So, you know, I think it takes a village / a town.
Definitely. And I am always happy to be here with you. So have a wonderful night, and thank you for your, you know, all of your amazing comments and thoughts and this conversation. And for everybody that's here, happy reading. Have a good night, everybody.
Night. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.